I would like to introduce our keynote speaker for this morning. It is my pleasure and privilege to introduce to you our keynote speaker for today. She is a 30-year veteran activist, scholar, teacher, and writer, and an experienced administrator, having served as president of Shaw College in Raleigh, North Carolina. She has served as professor of anthropology at the University of Minnesota and the University of Florida. A graduate of Grinnell College, she holds a Master of Fine Arts in Poetry from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, and a master's and PhD in anthropology, also from UMass. Her specialization in anthropology is the social construction of inequality. A first-generation college graduate who grew up in inner-city Chicago, she is described as one who gets things done under adverse circumstances. Our speaker is the author of several books, including Women of Beliefs, Gender and Change in Central America, and she has written 3 books of poetry. Her poems have appeared in 16 magazines and anthologies, and I'm sure you're eager to hear what she has to say this morning. So please give a warm Portland welcome to our keynote speaker, Dr. Irma McClaurin.
What I want to do today is talk about technology and ask the question whether it is the new frontier of inequality or the new American promise. 210 years ago, a prophet named Dr. Martin Luther King stood before thousands of people, poor people, rich people, whites, blacks, people of different cultures, gay people, straight people, but mostly hopeful people. He stood before all of them at the Lincoln Memorial in our nation's capital. And this prophet, this drum major for peace, this drum major for justice, this drum major for righteousness, as he sometimes referred to himself, presented America a vision of hope. He gave us a dream on that fateful day in 1963. He gave us a dream in which he articulated his belief in racial equality and social justice. This man, this prophetic and visionary man, also reminded us of the broken promises woven into the fabric of America's past and present and scattered throughout its history. Dr. King reminded us that those to whom we refer to as the founding fathers of this republic crafted a document, in some ways their own emancipatory document, the Declaration of Independence, in which they mapped out the premises and propositions that were the prerequisites for forming a new nation of greatness and a new nation of citizenship founded in freedom. We have to believe that they were good men, men of good intentions, honorable men, men of faith, businessmen, learned men, some slave-holding men, but men nonetheless. And so they also wove into that original credo of this country a fundamental belief that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But what about the women? Were they included? Not then. Were blacks also created equal? Not then. The crafters of these visionary documents, these men did not say. And so through omission, they wove into the credo of this country a trap door, a door of contradiction through which they could exclude those whom they deemed unworthy of full citizenship. Those people who were black and slaves, those people who were white and women, those people who were black and slaves and women, and of course the indigenous population was forgotten. We have spent decades trying to close this trap door. We have fought a civil war. We've lived among almost 100 years in legal apartheid from 1865 to 1965. We've founded a civil rights movement. We've passed legislation, all to close that trap door of contradictions in the hope of restoring two documents to their grandness, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. Today, as we celebrate this prophet, today on the birthday of this visionary leader so filled with hope so many years ago, a man born today in 1929, who I now realize never got the opportunity to reach my age. He died so young at 38. I stand before you to say that the momentous occasion of the historic March on Washington and the Declaration of War on Poverty, since Martin Luther King Jr. shared with us his vision, in the intervening 50 years of struggle and the press for racial equality, for the common good, we have made some progress. And the proof of that progress is not only this celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday on this official American holiday, but also another event taking place today in Washington, D.C., the second inauguration of America's first African-American president, Dr. King dared to believe, he dared to imagine that this future could occur. Someone remarked that President Obama's reelection is proof positive that his success was not a fluke. And he stands as a living symbol that if you can dream it, you can become it. It is a message we must embrace in our own lives, and a belief we must instill in our children and the youth. But even as we embrace this enormous change in the political direction of this country, equality for all remains a delicate balancing act. America is still walking a tightrope of inequality. Although the majority of Americans voted to help elect an African-American man to guide the country for a second term, we have not established a post-racial society. Race still matters. Poverty still matters, and racism is not a figment of our imagination. America is walking a tightrope in which the democratic promise and social contract of equality stand at one end, and poverty, limited access, and racism stand at the other. The safety net of an authentic life of liberty and the pursuit of happiness as a fully vested citizen is still just out of reach. America seems indecisive. On the one hand, we stand in awe of progress we have made. To elect a man who, a few decades ago, could never have aspired to such a position, who could not have dared to dream he could win. And there are those Americans who are fearful that as the country struggles to become more inclusive, as America struggles to embrace social change, they are fearful that they will lose their privilege. If we are to ride the crest of change of this Obama era, we must critically examine our economic system that is rooted in oppositions of those who have wealth and those who do not. Is there a middle ground? And I'm not talking about just the elevation of the restoration of the middle class. That is important. But equally important is the eradication of poverty. In a recent Huffington Post blog, a former colleague of mine at the Ford Foundation wrote, "How can we tolerate the fact that in the 21st century in America, more than 20.5 million Americans live on less than $11,000 a year for a family of four? Half of the federally defined poverty level. That means living on $7.55 a day. What's worse is that the quality of life of these poorest Americans resembles that of people in the world's least developed countries. Americans value fairness, yet 20.5 million Americans are born into and ensnared into a poverty trap, never getting a fair break. What has happened to America's promise that everyone get access to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness?" Dr. King also expounded on this issue of poverty and the broken promise in his book, Where Do We Go From Here? He saw poverty as the single most critical issue. In his own words, quote, "In the treatment of poverty nationally, one fact stands out. There are twice as many white poor as Negro poor in the United States. Therefore, I will not dwell on the experience of poverty that derives from racial discrimination, but will discuss the poverty that affects white and Negroes alike, end quote. For Dr. King, regardless of race, poverty was the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Poverty is the deal breaker for America today. How ironic that we have eradicated the Jim Crow laws of segregation, but we've not been able to eliminate poverty. How ironic that we have expanded opportunities in education, employment, and healthcare through integration, and yet poverty in each of these areas too often dictates the outcome of who has access. And I'm not suggesting that poverty trumps racism. That is an ongoing battle. And in my mind, the two are intricately linked. I think Dr. King would agree that we've won some battles, and they are significant, no question about it. Too many people struggled, lost their lives, including Dr. King, to minimize the achievement of the last 5 decades. We have won many battles to eliminate racial injustice, but the war is not over. And so where do we stand 13 years into the 21st century? Former President Clinton described in his second inaugural speech the choices facing America in this new technological epoch. Quote, "At the dawn of the 21st century, a free people must now choose to shape the forces of the information age and the global society, to unleash the limitless potential of all our people, and yes, to form a more perfect union." Powerful words, inspiring words, but tell me, how do you shape the forces of the information age, or what I choose to call the technology age, if you are poor and enmeshed in poverty? How do you contend with living in a global society if you are poor and enmeshed in poverty? How do you unleash the limitless potential of poor people? Today, poverty has many faces. It wears many hats, but most significantly, poverty acts as a wall, a barrier. It prevents individuals and groups from moving forward. If you lack the economic means, then you cannot acquire an education, even if admissions is no longer blocked. If you lack the economic means, then you do not have access to technology, one of the single most critical forces driving our country and shaping the world today. And so if Dr. King were to honor us with his presence today, what might he say? Might he contemplate the current state of affairs and the way in which technology rules our life? Might he consider that in tandem with poverty, that technology represents the newest frontier of inequality? Or might he embrace the simultaneity of thought for which he was noted and add that technology may represent a means by which the poverty gap can be closed, and at the same time, it may serve as a barrier for many of our country's poor? I ask you to decide for yourself at the end. Click, click, click. This is the sound of a computer mouse. How many of you use a mouse today? Raise your hand. Okay. How many of you have computers at home? Not a lot. How many of you have internet? Okay. How many of you have high-speed internet? Now, how many of you use a mouse? Okay, if you raise your hand in the affirmative, then please know, and I apologize in advance because I'm going to hurt some of your feelings, please know that by current technology standards, you are considered outdated and obsolete. How many of you have an iPhone? Mine is keeping time for me. Okay, hold them up. Okay, because I know you've been scrolling under the table. How many of you have Androids? Okay. We iPhone users, owners, we forgive you, as does Steve Jobs, wherever he is. Okay, put them back in your pocket and stop the silent scrolling under the table. Click, 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 click. While that is the sound of the mouse, this is the sound of the iPhone and its clones. Silence. The face of progress today is the touch screen. These phones, along with iPods, how many have iPods? Okay, iPads have radically altered the world. Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple Computers and the vision force behind the invention of the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad, pretty much everything else that has shaped and advanced our current digital and virtual worlds, created a technology revolution with his products. In his mind, he set out not to build a better computer as a tool, but to, quote, change the world. His epic ad when he returned to Apple after being ousted read in part, "Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers. You can quote them, you can disagree with them, you can glorify or vilify them, but the only thing you can't do is ignore them because they change things. They push the human race forward." Now, how many children of color and poor children, and I link the two because there's been a historic correlation between them, lay in their beds at night and dream of changing the world? With President Obama as our leader, they may now have a concrete role model, but how many lay in bed at night and dream that they can change the world? Steve Jobs had no idea that in changing the world, he would contribute to what has been dubbed the digital divide. Now, Jacob Nielsen, writing on the digital divide, characterizes it as having three stages: the economic divide, those who can afford to purchase a computer, which he sees as resolvable, the usability divide, and the empowerment divide. And just very briefly, what he argues is that the usability divide has to do with the fact that so many of our children have low literacy skills. And so they're unable to take advantage of what computers have to offer because websites are written for people generally with college-level education. So if you can't understand it, you can't use it. With regard to the empowerment divide, he says, quote, "It is a hard one. Even if computers and the internet were extraordinarily easy to use, not everybody would make full use of the opportunities that they afford. Some of the examples he gives is not understanding advanced search engines, accepting the first search results, and you can think about other ways." Back to the clicks. Borrowing from Gil Scott-Heron, the technology revolution will not be televised. It will not be brought to you by Comcast, DirecTV, or AT&T U-verse. It will not be available in analog through cable, HDM1 or HDM2. The technology revolution is live. It will be uploaded onto YouTube with 10,000 views per second. It will be streamed live while being tweeted using 140 characters or less. The technology revolution will tell the world to think different if you are fortunate enough to own a computer and understand how to use it. The technology revolution will not take place in a science fiction book because it is already here. The technology revolution says the personal computer and modem are the keys to the vault. The technology revolution says through the internet, though the internet is opening untold doors of information and opportunity, are we ready? Who does the technology revolution serve? Says the voice of reason and of power and privilege. If you are poor, rural, or a member of a minority group, you are fast being left behind. The technology revolution will not be televised or videotaped. It will be accessed on iPods, iPhones, iPads, and smart replicas called Androids. It will have background music complements of the iTunes store. It will be an app that you can download and navigate on your phone. It will be a tag reader with a box to scan and take you directly to a website. The technology revolution will increase the digital divide between the haves and the have-nots. It will leave you behind if you are a member of the 46% of poorest households who do not own a computer, as compared to only 4% of the wealthiest households that go without one. The technology revolution will not care that in 2010 to 2011, 67.9 million people were not able to access internet sites regularly. The technology revolution will not care that in the same period, 49.1 million people have fallen below the poverty line. The technology revolution is not interested in correlations between poverty and lack of access to the internet. The technology revolution is not concerned that, quote, Hispanic and African Americans are still less likely to have access to home internet than are Caucasian Americans. The technology revolution is not interested in rural access. It does not care that you can live on a farm only 50 miles from the nearest big city, say New York or Chicago, and be unable to compete as effectively for business as somebody sitting in a skyscraper. In Oregon, 60 out of every 1,000 workers in the private sector are employed by high-tech firms, placing it at the 11th highest rate in the nation. Technology is here to stay in Oregon, but is Oregon population prepared, especially its poor? Not exactly. In the state of Oregon, according to the Children's Partnership Youth and Technology Fact Sheet, 56% of households earning less than $15,000 per year do not own a computer, compared to 33% of all Oregon's households and 38% of all households nationally. 61% of the same low-income households do not use the internet at home, compared to 39% statewide and 49% nationally. And in 19% of the schools in Oregon, the majority of teachers, at least half, are beginners when it comes to using technology. So here we stand in the midst of a technology revolution, and our children are not prepared. Teachers are not prepared, and a little less than a third of students in school today lack basic skills in math and reading to be able to harness that technology. So is there a glimmer of hope? The answer is yes, and very briefly I want to share with you that at the University of Minnesota in 2007, I went there to help start the first Urban Research and Outreach Engagement Center. And one of the things we did was to renovate a 21,000 square foot derelict shopping center in the community into a research center. We made it a state-of-the-art facility, wireless, bringing the best technology in a community that's known as an empowerment zone, where 56% of all the mortgage foreclosures had occurred in 3 zip codes. We took the best and brought it to the community. And our greatest success was applying for an ARA grant for broadband access. We received $2.9 million. Thank you. $2.9 million, the university contributed $750,000, and with that money, what we did was to take 11 community-based computer centers that were not in schools and not in libraries, and to upgrade their facilities. We actually created 2 new ones, one in a housing project as a model for the Minneapolis public housing. And we took those computer centers, upgraded their facilities, and we created what made our grant, I think, the one that the Department of Commerce liked, because we were the only university in the first wave to be given grants, and we were the only organization in the state of Minnesota to receive a grant, is that it was also job creation. And so we created the BAP program, Broadband Access Apprentices, in which they would learn how to not only use the technology, but be able to troubleshoot, to be trained in how to harness that energy, and then serve as people to serve as a resource in those centers so they could expand the hours and also help the community. Of those 11 centers, they cut across Hispanic communities, African American, Hmong communities, African, Somalian populations, and those centers, we did them in community centers because they already have the language and the resources to be able to communicate with the constituency. We also worked with newspapers like the Skanner, community newspapers, who really had brought the idea to us, and we worked in collaboration. They now have technology columns in their newspapers in multiple languages to tell the community about what's happening. So there is some promise, there is some glimmer of hope. And so what I want to do is close by saying, in the arena of technology, no child in America must be left behind. We must make eradicating the digital divide and closing the technology gap a priority at the community level, at the national level, and at the global level. Technology has made our lives so interconnected that we cannot sit in our corner of the world and ignore what is happening globally. We must tackle poverty directly and commit to advancing the technology skills and knowledge of those who lack access or have minimal access. We must move the knowledge in the poor and underserved communities and among ourselves beyond that of simply consuming technology and only using it for simple functions, entertainment, movies, music, ringtones, Facebook. Cell phones, parents, if your child has a cell phone and can't tell you what a SIM card is or why their signals are dropping because there are not enough cell towers, take the phone away. We must encourage our youth to have vision and curiosity around technology. We must instill in them the firm belief that they are capable of transforming this world in their lifetime. We celebrate Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday today because it inspires us to believe that anything is possible, including the transformation of an entire country. Dr. King guided us to do this during his short lifetime. We must continue his legacy and do it again. He asked us once, what kind of country do we want? Our answer should be an America that is equal in all arenas, including technology, and delivers on its promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all of its citizens. Thank you.